You ever seen a good man break? Not the kind of break where he walks out or gives up. I'm talking about the kind of break where something inside him snaps so quietly that nobody hears it but him. The kind of break that turns the softest man into someone he swore he'd never become. Because here's the ugly truth nobody wants to admit. Patient men don't turn angry on their own. They're created, shaped, conditioned, slowly, quietly, subtly, by the wrong woman. And by the time anyone notices what happened, it's already too late. He starts as the man every woman claims she wants. Calm, emotionally mature, steady. The guy who listens, who communicates, who tries to understand instead of trying to win. The guy who says, let's talk, instead of, whatever. The man who lets her speak, lets her feel, lets her unravel without ever making her feel judged. A good man. A solid man. A man raised by a mother who taught him never to raise his voice at a woman, and by a father who taught him that real strength is calmness under pressure. He enters the relationship believing he can love her into safety, reason her into peace, talk her into understanding. He truly believes patience solves everything, because his whole life, it always did. Until her. Because 6 months with the wrong woman can turn this patient man into someone unrecognizable. You've seen it. Maybe you've lived it. The quiet man who suddenly snaps. The soft-spoken guy who suddenly raises his voice. The respectful partner who suddenly slams a door just to be heard. People look at him and say, wow, he changed. They shake their heads. They judge him. They whisper, see? He was always like that deep down. He wasn't. She changed him. Or more accurately, she trained him. It always starts small. The little things. Things he brings up calmly, gently. Hey, could you let me know when you're running late? I felt hurt when you joked about me in front of your friends. I wish you'd talk to me before making decisions that affect both of us. Simple things. Human things. And she responds with, you're too sensitive. Relax, it wasn't that serious. Why are you always complaining? You're overreacting. And for the first time, he feels something shift inside him. A seed of frustration planted in soil he never wanted. But he stays calm. He tries again. And again. And again. Different tone. Different day. Different approach. Same result. He's ignored. Invalidated. Silenced. The worst part? She doesn't even notice she's doing it. Women don't realize how much damage they do in these moments. They think they're keeping the peace. They think they're winning the argument. They think they're brushing off little things. But what they're really doing is conditioning a man to believe that patience is useless. That calmness is a waste of breath. That communication doesn't work unless it's loud. And the saddest part? He doesn't want to get loud. He hates what anger feels like in his chest. He hates how his hands shake when he finally raises his voice. He hates the look on her face when she flinches, not because she's scared of him, but because she doesn't recognize him. And neither does he. Let me tell you a real story, the kind that happens every day. A guy told me once about his girlfriend who always dismissed his concerns. He spent a year talking calmly about things that bothered him. She rolled her eyes. Told him he was dramatic. Told her friends he was too emotional for a man. And then one night, after the 100th time she ignored him, he snapped. He raised his voice, not even yelling, just louder than usual. Suddenly she stopped, looked at him, and said, okay, fine, I hear you, calm down. In that moment, she taught him the most dangerous lesson of his life. Calm doesn't work, but anger does. From that day on, every argument ended with him raising his voice. Not because he wanted to, but because his brain learned that it was the only way to get through to someone who refused to listen unless pushed. This is how good men lose themselves. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. Until the day he wakes up and hates the man he's become. Until he looks in the mirror and doesn't see patience anymore. He sees rage he never asked for. And what does she say? You've changed. You're toxic. I can't deal with your anger anymore. She leaves, convinced it was all his fault, never realizing that she crafted the version of him she now fears. She plants the bomb and then runs when it explodes. And here's the darkest part. This is becoming common. Everywhere. Good men collapsing under the weight of unaddressed emotional neglect. Women dismissing gentle communication because they're used to loud men. Women ignoring calmness because they don't know what healthy communication sounds like. Women pushing patient men into becoming exactly what they claim to hate, and then blaming them for the transformation. And nobody talks about it. Nobody warns men. Nobody teaches women that ignoring a man's calm voice is as destructive as yelling at him. The truth is simple: men don't become angry. They're driven to anger. Not because they want to dominate, but because they're desperate to be heard. Not because they enjoy raising their voice, but because that's the only time she finally looks up from her phone. Not because they're aggressive, but because calm communication, their default, their value, their gift, was suffocated every time they tried to use it. In this first part of the story, we're not talking about villains. We're talking about good men slowly breaking under the weight of emotional dismissal. And if you look around today, you'll see them everywhere: tired, frustrated, confused, ashamed of the anger they never wanted. You'll see women too, furious at men they unintentionally trained, trapped in dynamics they never meant to create. And the saddest truth? By the time either of them realizes what happened, the damage is already done. He didn't notice the exact day it started to change, only the feeling that his words stopped landing. At first it was small. She'd scroll while he was speaking, smile without listening, say, and then do the opposite. He told himself not to make it a big deal. He remembered all the advice about staying calm, using "I feel" statements, choosing good timing. He did everything right, the way men are told a good man should. He waited until she wasn't stressed, he chose neutral language, he kept his voice low, his body open. And the more perfectly he tried to speak, the more invisible he felt. That's how the second phase begins. He stops talking to be understood and starts talking just to be noticed. The difference is tiny from the outside. Inside, it's the bridge between patience and fury. It's not that she's evil. In most stories, she isn't. She's busy, overloaded, used to noise. She's dated men who only took her seriously when she cried, so somewhere inside she learned that emotional intensity equals importance. Calm equals later. Later equals never. Meanwhile, he was raised on the opposite rule. Calm is respect. So they meet, two different languages, and without knowing it, they start training each other. She teaches him that silence is power, postponement is victory, and only volume cuts through. He teaches her that if she ignores long enough, the storm will eventually come and she'll finally, briefly, get the focus she wanted. No villains. Just bad reinforcement shaping two people into their worst selves. He tries everything before anger. The jokes, the softness, the long texts he rewrites 4 times before sending. The "maybe I didn't explain well," the "let me try again," the "can we set a time to talk?" He plans the conversation like an exam. Choose a quiet night, after dinner, when she's relaxed. He hears himself reduce serious pain into careful bullet points he never reads out loud, because saying it like that feels robotic and he wants to be human, generous. He watches her eyes glaze at the second sentence. He hears the sigh, the "can we not do this right now?" the "you always pick the worst moments." He swallows it down. Later, he tells himself, later, there's a story I keep hearing with different names. He's waiting outside a restaurant in the rain because she's 5 minutes away. He's been 5 minutes away for 40 minutes. He texts kindly, "All good, just checking you're safe." She replies with a heart, and then nothing. When she arrives, she laughs. Traffic was crazy, and the laugh wraps around the lateness like it was a joke, and because he loves her, he laughs too. Inside, something small cracks. Not because of the weight, but because the weight didn't matter. Not to her. Not enough to say, "I made you wait, I'm sorry." That night he tries to say it softly, "I felt dismissed standing there," and she kisses him to change the channel, and the channel changes, and the lesson lands. A kiss erases a fracture, but only for her. He stores it. A person can carry 1,000 tiny fractures and still look whole. Another story, she teases him in front of friends. It's not cruel, just sharp enough to cut. He smiles because that's what polite men do. He's thinking, "we'll talk later," because that's what patient men do. Later comes, he explains in perfect warm language and she says, "You're so sensitive." The words slide under his ribs like a cold blade. Sensitive, the insult that sounds like a diagnosis. From that day, whenever he tries to raise a boundary, the word appears like a stamp on his forehead. He hates that it works on him. He hates that he doubts himself. He hates, most of all, that she doesn't see the cost of using it. Weeks stack on weeks. He notices the pattern only when the pattern is already a cage. Calm equals delay, delay equals dismissal, dismissal equals escalation. The first time his voice climbs, he hates it. He apologizes while he's doing it. He says, "I don't want to talk like this." Even as the old training in her nervous system flips on, she's finally focused, fully present, answering. And because it works, the animal brain in him, older than lessons, older than culture, files a note. This is the switch that turns the light on. He loves the light more than he hates the switch. That's how decent men start using tools they despise. People judge the moment he slams the door. They never watched the 100 moments he swallowed the insult. They judge the scene where he says, "Enough." They never saw the rehearsals where he tried tenderness, humor, patience, logic, silence. They say, if he respected her, he wouldn't raise his voice. He says, "If she respected me, I wouldn't have to." And now both of them are right and both are bleeding. Sometimes the story goes sideways into collapse instead of anger. He goes quiet. Not peaceful, empty. He stops asking for what he needs. He becomes agreeable in the way a person becomes invisible. He learns to time his love around her moods, to measure his words so carefully they lose their meaning, to carry his own disappointment like luggage he never sets down. People call him stable. He calls it survival. Resentment grows roots in silence. By the time it breaches the surface, the garden is already lost. And then there's the third version, the men who leave. They love her and leave anyway. They look at the cost ledger, what it takes from them just to be heard, and decide the price is their character, and their character is not for sale. They go without yelling, without essays, without revenge. They pack the memories respectfully and take the lesson. Choose partners who treat calm as urgent, respect as serious, gentleness as strength. Later, she tells friends he couldn't handle conflict. What she means is, he wouldn't destroy himself to stay. If you zoom in close, you see the tiny gears turning this machine. Selective response. Intermittent attention. Emergencies rewarded, diplomacy ignored. He says, "Could you please tell me when you change plans?" "Nothing." He says louder, "Why do I always find out last?" Response immediately. He begs himself not to connect those dots, because once you do, it's hard to unlearn. He promises he'll never raise his voice again. He does. He promises he'll leave if it keeps happening. He doesn't. Because hope is a powerful leash, and good men hate giving up on what they vowed to protect. I know a man who kept a note in his phone of every time he tried to speak gently so he wouldn't forget he wasn't always like this. He wasn't building a case, he was building a memory of himself. On the day he finally left, he didn't show her the list. He read it alone, cried once, and walked away. That's how the quiet ones end it, with the dignity nobody sees. It's easy to accuse men of exploding. It's harder to ask why the fuse was always lit. What if the opposite of toxic masculinity isn't softness at any cost, but boundaries that don't need to roar? What if the kindest thing a woman can do with a patient man is respond while his voice is still gentle, take the small pain seriously so it doesn't have to grow teeth? What if the kindest thing a man can do for himself is refuse to practice being ignored? This isn't a war between the sexes. This is a plea to stop training each other into uglier shapes. If calm means not important, you will create chaos to feel prioritized. If kindness means optional, you will sculpt cruelty to be heard. We are all as good as the systems our love rehearses. Practice dismissing, and you will get volume. Practice delaying, and you will get an explosion. Practice listening, and you will keep the man you fell in love with, the one whose patience made you feel safe before you taught him it was useless. There is a moment in every story where it can still be saved. It's quiet, unspectacular. He says, "Can we talk about last night?" She puts the phone down. She looks him in the eyes. She says, "Tell me everything, I won't defend myself for 5 minutes." He breathes. The fuse in his chest unwinds a little. That's all it takes sometimes. 5 minutes of true attention to reverse 6 months of bad conditioning. But if it doesn't happen, if the lesson stays the same, that calm equals silence, then one day the kindest man you know will play the one note that gets through. You will hate that note. He will hate that note. And both of you will insist the song changed by itself. Before you say he turned angry, ask where his patience went. It didn't disappear. It was spent. Spent buying chances, buying time, buying hope. Spent funding conversations that never happened. Spent making space for someone who didn't realize space is a gift you either honor or lose. When patience runs out, people don't become different, they become revealed. The man at the end of his rope isn't a stranger, he's the same man you couldn't hear, finally loud enough to be audible, finally too tired to be gentle, finally honest in the only language you left him. If you've never seen that transformation, count yourself lucky. If you've lived it, you don't need a study. You remember the day your own voice scared you. You remember apologizing for the volume even as relief washed over you that, at last, someone listened. You remember promising never again, then doing it again, then hating yourself for learning so fast what you never wanted to know. That's the cost of bad patterns. They turn good hearts into efficient students. Some men do find their way back. They relearn quiet in rooms where quiet is respected, with people who answer the first time, partners who treat concerns like fragile packages instead of dull chores. It's shocking how quickly gentleness returns in environments that don't punish it. That should tell us everything. The man you call angry might simply be a man who ran out of places where kindness works. And if you're the woman in this story and you recognize yourself, you're not the villain either. You can change the training. Treat his calm as urgent. Repeat back what you heard. Decide the little things are big because they are the early warnings of the big things. Understand that when a good man raises his voice, he is not trying to conquer you. He is trying not to vanish. If you learn to hear him softly, he will never need to speak hard. This is part 2, the middle of the bridge where people either meet each other halfway or wave from opposite cliffs. What happens next will decide who they become. A man he respects and a woman who feels safe with him, or two strangers who swear they tried while quietly teaching each other the exact wrong lessons. The final stage of this transformation doesn't explode like a bomb. It erodes like a coastline. Slowly, silently, invisibly, until one day the man who used to smile at her with soft eyes now looks at her like a stranger he's trying to understand. And if you don't know what to look for, you'll miss every sign. You'll think he's tired. You'll think he's distracted. You'll think he's losing interest. But what's really happening is far more tragic. He's shutting down the last parts of himself that ever tried to be understood. Because before a man becomes angry, he becomes numb. That numbness is the funeral of everything he tried to say. The burial ground of patience. The quiet graveyard of all the conversations that died in his throat. He doesn't raise his voice anymore because he's already raised it once. The day he realized it didn't matter. That day, a switch flipped inside him. Not the switch to anger, that one flipped earlier, but the switch to detachment. That switch is silent. And once it flips, nothing is ever the same again. Women think the scariest version of a man is the one who yells. The scariest version is the one who stops. Stops explaining, stops repeating, stops hoping, stops trying. The scariest version is the man who looks at her with calmness so cold it feels like winter inside the room. The man who used to beg for connection now watches her storms like weather he no longer bothers to hide from. Because storms can only hurt people who still stand outside in the rain. He's learned to go indoors. He still loves her, or at least he remembers loving her, but it feels distant now, like a life he lived in another body. A body that had more patience, more optimism, more belief that two people could always fix things if they cared enough. He's older now. Not in years, but in spirit. He's aged 10 emotional winters in one relationship. His innocence is gone. His softness is wounded. His trust is thin. This is the part of the story no one warns good men about. It's not the anger that destroys them. It's the moment they stop recognizing the version of themselves they became trying to be heard. Let me tell you another real story, one that repeats itself across cities, homes, relationships everywhere. A man told me his girlfriend would always push arguments off. Not now, she'd say. Later. Later never came. Instead, resentment did. One night he finally lost his temper, slammed his hand on the counter, voice shaking with a year's worth of swallowed words, and she immediately listened, apologized, held him. She never realized that in that moment, she trained him to associate love with eruption. She never realized she conditioned him to believe that his voice needed to break in order to be valued. That night changed their relationship forever. Not because he yelled, but because it worked. But something else happened after that moment, something far worse. A month later, something bothered him. Something small. He thought, talk calmly. And then the memory hit him. Calm doesn't work. So he didn't talk at all. He kept it inside. He told himself not to make everything a battle. Not to be that guy. He convinced himself silence was maturity. It wasn't. It was the beginning of emotional abandonment. 2 months later he wasn't angry at her, he was indifferent. He didn't care where she went, who she talked to, whether she answered his question. Not because he stopped loving her, but because caring requires emotional energy and he was bankrupt. This is the end phase, when a woman says, "You don't fight for us anymore," and the man answers with a quiet honesty, "Because I'm tired of fighting alone." That sentence is the obituary of the relationship. Not the breakup. The obituary, the written record of a love that died long before anyone confessed its death. This final collapse often shocks women. They look at the man who once adored them and say, "Where did you go? Why don't you talk to me? Why don't you open up?" But she doesn't understand the truth. She closed the door long before he did. He knocked softly. She didn't answer. He knocked louder. She told him he was overreacting. He finally pushed the door open. She told him he was too aggressive. So eventually he stopped knocking and started walking. Not out of the house, out of the emotional partnership. A man can stay in the same room and still be gone. That's the part nobody teaches you. And when he finally leaves physically, days, weeks, months later, it isn't dramatic. There's no screaming, no big announcement, no long speech rehearsed in the mirror. He just leaves. Quietly. Respectfully. He packs his kindness, his patience, the version of himself she couldn't hear, and walks out with the dignity she didn't know she was crushing. And the world reacts with the same predictable script. She was too much for him. He couldn't handle her. He just snapped. He's an angry man. Nobody stops to ask, what did it cost him to stay that long? What parts of his heart did he burn trying to keep the house warm? What pieces of his identity did he sacrifice in the name of being patient? The truth is brutal. Patient men don't leave first. They leave last. But when they leave forever. And here's the twist nobody sees coming. After he leaves, he becomes himself again. The anger fades first. It always does. Anger wasn't natural to him. It was reactive. A survival technique. A tool someone else taught him. Once he's in an environment where calmness is heard and respected, his softness returns like an animal stepping out of hiding. His voice lowers. His body relaxes. His kindness reappears. And suddenly he remembers, oh, this is who I am. This is who I was before the conditioning. This is the man I like being. And here comes the cruelest consequence of all. The woman who trained him into anger rarely gets to experience the healed version. That version blooms with someone else. Someone who listens the first time, someone whose respect pulls the best out of him instead of the worst. But before you think this story is about blaming women, here's the truth, it's about awareness. Because this pattern is everywhere. In couples who love each other. In marriages that could have lasted. In men who wanted to give everything and women who didn't know what they were doing. Nobody teaches us these psychological traps. Nobody warns us that ignoring calmness is as destructive as shouting. Nobody explains that attention is reinforcement and silence is punishment. Nobody says that love languages aren't just romantic, they're behavioral conditioning. We train each other every day without knowing it. The real ending to this story isn't tragedy. It's hope. Patterns can change. Men can unlearn anger when their voice is respected again. Women can unlearn dismissiveness once they see the consequences. Relationships can rebuild if both people recognize the system they accidentally created. But it starts with one simple truth, a truth most people never hear until it's too late. The quietest men carry the loudest pain. And when their patience runs out, it's not anger you should fear. It's the silence that comes after. Because silence is the final chapter. The sound of a man who loved deeply, tried endlessly, broke quietly, and finally chose himself.